too. All right, and feel free to do that. I'll try to control my profanity so that it's family friendly for everyone. Yeah, so thanks for being here, and thanks to Corey for setting all this stuff up. If you guys don't know, Corey's the guy who runs our studio Instagram, and he's doing a great job with it. And so
Thanks.
that's evidenced by the fact that you all are here and looking to learn some stuff. So I've been in Texas since 2014, and the All-State process still makes no sense to me. Uh, all I know is you guys play these etudes for approximately forever, and then all of a sudden you're done with them. But we're not done with them yet, right? Is any yeah? So the good thing is, even if you are done with them, the topics that we're going to go into most probably will work for whatever you're working on. I have never judged region. I've never judged area. I've only judged state, 5A, 6A, all state for the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And in general, the things that are problems are the same things that I work on for professional auditions, the same things that I harp on my students here at WT about. And it's usually sound and time and intonation. And then, of course, knowledge of what's on the page. But you can really cut a lot of people just if you're looking at sound, time, and intonation. Those things are all linked. So I'm sure that's not new information, but we'll go over some of that stuff. So we have a couple of videos that people submitted and that I should be able to share my screen and have you hear. So I have too many folders open already. Okay, Boomer, here we go. All right, so we have Noah and Bryson. You guys want to fight for who goes first? No?
I'll let him go first.
I'm
I'll let Noah go
looking at the
first.
right window. Who's going first?
Let's have Noah go first. He doesn't have a microphone, so we'll just listen to his and
Perfect.
talk about it.
So we can all roast. No, we're going to be nice and supportive. All right, so share the screen. And this one, if I remember correctly, is a movie type file, so it needs to open with this. Okay, awesome. Great job. Everybody give Noah a hand. Yeah, put your little Zoom things on. I'm really happy that we haven't had to do too many of these Zoom meetings. A lot of schools have had a lot more Zooming, and we've been pretty fortunate to avoid the worst of the consequences. So I'm still pretty new to the Zoom. Yeah, great job. I really enjoy. Let me see if we have some stragglers that I can help in here, and maybe make a. Yeah, here we go. Now Corey can help me admit people who are late. Anyway, so I really like some of the musical choices that you've done here. I really enjoy the time that you allowed, particularly before the recap there, 4 lines from the end, right as the middle material is ending, and then also near the end. I really enjoyed the free use of time, and that's something we should, I think, be okay about, especially at this level. I had a fun experience the other week. I listened to Canyon High School, right 2 minutes south of the university, and I listened to an incredible player play on tenor, play the etudes incredibly, and he played them really, really musically, just like this, with the time it making sense, pushing and pulling the time, a nice rubato, and that's one thing that I wish I could judge region and area and all that stuff to see how much they care about, is this metronomically correct at that level. But I know at the All-State, at the convention, at the state level, when you're playing it like that, I'm completely on board with this. And I think that pretty much everybody else enjoys a musical performance as well. I mean, you're sick of playing these. Everyone who's judging is probably at least as sick of hearing them. So if you can give them a nice musical performance like that, for me, that's bonus points right there. So just as an example, I'll play it 2 ways just so you can get the feeling there. Right, so that's kind of what's written. It doesn't say to slow down, but boy, does it make a lot more sense when you do. Etc. Right? It's so much better. Number 2 wins every time for me. So that's really nice. I think you can do some more of that near the end. It says morendo, which means dying away, and that can mean volume, or that can mean time, or it can mean both. We as trombone players are really good at supporting crescendos. We're really good at getting louder. When it comes time for us to get softer, we just go limp immediately. Most of us. It takes a lot of support to play a diminuendo, or in this case, a morendo. Rather than right, we've painted ourselves into a corner by getting too soft too soon. So make it a noticeable diminuendo is what I would recommend for everybody there. It says morendo, dying away. Feel free to slow down as much as you want, but if you do too much too soon, again, it's going to get kind of comical. And then we're there for G flat for the rest of the year. You don't want any sudden changes, so make it noticeable at the beginning and then more and more and more and more noticeable near the end, if that makes sense, rather than just immediately hitting quicksand and sinking into nothing. So that fits very well with the direction at the very beginning, the molto espressivo. What I think there can be some improvement on, and again, internet video quality and all that stuff, take this with a grain of salt. It may be entirely different in the room, but connection. I think there's more room for connection between notes. You're doing a really good job of observing what's slurred, what's not slurred, but it can still be, the notes can still touch when the notes can still touch even though they're not under a phrase marking or a slur marking. Let me see if I can find this. This is page number 25, and screen share it for you. I will turn the screen share on when I found it, which is right there. Okay. So what I'm looking at, all these things that are sort of part of the same phrase. Look at the very beginning, like the first to the second full bar. If we're being literal, it might be right, but I think there's some more room, and this is an example, not necessarily something that Noah did wrong, or not necessarily an issue that I heard in Noah's recording. But I think there's a way that we can put these notes under the phrase or under the longer phrase and still mark what's on the page. So we just really don't stop the air. Something like that, where it's like we do when we're talking. Sometimes we have a hard consonant, like I'm just saying now, and sometimes we have softer consonants and softer vowel sounds that are all sort of rolled together. But we don't stop the air between enunciating the syllables unless we're being strange. So it really wasn't a big issue, but I think that's an avenue. If I had to pick one to improve, it would be that. It would be I've lost everyone. It would be great video. Yeah, there we go. If there's a thing to improve, it would be that connection, that being able to facilitate these different articulations while the air is still flowing. Okay. Let's see. Does anybody have any questions at the moment?
I just have something to say. I thought that like every time that he came in, like really quietly on those low notes, I loved the articulation. It was just that, duh.
Yeah.
It just started. I
Yes.
really liked that.
That's what happens when you have enough air at the very beginning. That note would speak whether he had his tongue working or not. So a good way to practice that is air articulations, air attacks. Right, so I'm not saying we need to articulate everything with air attacks, but it's a good practice tool. I know that maybe 99 times out of 100 that note's going to start, no matter what the tongue's doing. If I can air attack it like that, all the tongue does is clean it up a little bit. So what goes into that is you have to hear the pitch and then trust your air. Right. This goes into another one of my favorite topics, which is if you can air attack it particularly. A great way to get a clean articulation is to have the tongue stroke happen at the same time as that air attack is working, as opposed to the tongue releasing the air into the mouthpiece. Make it work more like your voice works, like singing works. Think about the order that the air is moving. For a singer, it's going from the lungs through these things that are next to each other producing sound. Then it goes into this thing that changes the sound, and this is where all the articulation happens. The very last thing that the air encounters as it's coming out is the articulation, the p or the t, all that stuff. That's the last thing. The tone is already generated here by the time you're articulating it here. On the trombone, it's a little bit different. The air is still going from your lungs through these things that vibrate, making sound, and into this thing that changes shape and changes the sound, but the articulation happens earlier in the process. But we like, it's my personal opinion, that we innately, instinctually like singing. We like the voice. We're humans. We have evolved to hear other humans talking. We're very, very familiar with how the voice works. And so when something happens out of order, like if somebody doesn't connect with their air when they're talking, doesn't connect with something's wrong with that person. When somebody can articulate somehow before the tone starts, before the consonant sound happens before the vowel sound of the vocal cords happens, that's weird and abnormal. It's a lot easier to do that on a brass instrument, to go right, we tongue, and then the note starts. It's a lot more common to hear that on a brass instrument. It sounds so much more natural when the sound is starting as the articulation is happening. Right. I usually say this with tenors, which sounds more Alessi-ish, but for basses, which sounds more Jim Markey-ish. If we go or right, the second one for sure. I always use the Grundal as that example. For tenor, I guess it would be versus right. The second one is still clean, other than the first note, but it sounds so much better because the articulation is happening right as the sound is starting. And Noah's doing a great job all the way through this recording and doing that. Cool. Anybody else have anything to add or any questions? Anything you need further polished? Or shall we listen to the second video? Sounds like we shall listen to the second video. Which, do I only have the one I do? And this also needs to be... No, I think this one works just fine here. There we go. eyes work. Little zoom hand icons all around. All right. Good. So if we're going through those steps, right, the sound, time, intonation, and then representing what's on the page. They represented what's on the page well. You understand what's on there. Everything's going well there. The time was largely really good. There's a couple of spots that, like the pulse was really good, but maybe the individual subdivision could take a little bit of work. Intonation was largely pretty solid. Sound, again, it's so hard to do sound, you know, from you through your horn, through whatever recording device you're using, through the internet, to my computer speakers, to my ears, and then, you know, however you guys are hearing this through Zoom. I don't know if you can hear it that well or not. But yeah, so the there's some things about the sound that are working really well. I enjoy the that you're going for it. I really don't mind some brightness in the sound. Marky calls it brilliance, and I think it's entirely needed in both tenor and bass trombone sound. Trombone in Italian just means big trumpet, right? If you were to unroll this, unbend this would be a double-sized trumpet. This is a little bit bigger than it would be proportionally because it's a large bore, and the bass is obviously a little bit, again, too big to be quite that, but the idea is still the same. If you were to unwind a straight small horn, that would be a double-sized trumpet. So what that means is our sound model should be a lot more like a trumpet than like a euphonium, even on bass trombone. So that's great. That brightness in the sound allows the sound to project and to carry. That's one big thing that I've noticed the past couple of years. What with the effects of COVID and everything, people practicing in small rooms, practicing in bedrooms, and playing for microphones, is that you don't really have to project. I'm playing right into the mic there. You don't really have to project much. That's just a nice piano sound. But if I made that sound on the stage, like right after these classes, I've got a couple of Holiday Pops concerts to do. If I was to make that sound on the back of the stage at the Globe News Center, maybe the conductor would hear it, but definitely not the audience in the back of the hall, for sure. So we have to project these sounds. In the room we do these auditions in normally at TMEA is a pretty big room, and shares a wall with the tenors, and tenors are usually trying to cover up the basses and vice versa. It's a beautiful noise, but there's definitely room to project there. Now, you know, if the judging's done online, that's a little different. But fingers crossed, most of the playing you'll do in your life will be live, and therefore will need to be projected. So we need that nice brilliance in the middle of the sound. We also need the stable core in the sound, and I think that's what we can work on. There's a couple ways to go about that. One of the ways I like to find the core of the sound is to play it soft. This says forte espressivo, so let's do the opposite and play it piano boringo. See if we can get full tone, full resonance while it's soft. So when we play it louder, it shouldn't take any of that away. We're just adding more to it. So maybe mezzo piano. Right. G's in fourth. So extrapolate that. Let's try to play it forte now with that same idea. So what I'm trying to do there is to have it occupy as low of an energy state as possible. I don't want that extra sound energy to be doing anything weird like trying to force the pitch higher or to wobble me off the note even. I don't want the pitch to get spread and uncontrolled. I want it to be just as easy, just louder, and allow that to come with some brightness. If we try to control too much with the face, and we use that same air, what we get is the only thing I did there was use more lip tension, and the sound is not as good. It's splattier, it's less controlled, and I'm sure a lot of you hear that sound in a lot of your sections in your school bands, right? We're really used to hearing this like that sort of thing. All I'm doing is activating this right here, the center. Where's the camera here? The center of the aperture too much. I like to think of everything inside the mouthpiece being as passive as possible. If you were to just blow air past, take a bassoon reed, right? It's two pieces of cane right next to each other, and you don't have to do anything with that reed. It's in your mouth, and you blow, and it makes a horrible duck call sound. And so our lips work that same way. Now, granted, the mouthpiece is part of it. The mouthpiece is part of that system. It holds the lips in place, but once the lips are in there, they're essentially a passive reed. They do their best work when they're not tense. And so that's the difference in those two sounds. The air support is great for both. I'm using plenty of air. The pitch stayed pretty constant. But if you can really trust that the instrument works best when at North Texas, they talk about that there is no buzz whatsoever. And I understand that pedagogy. It's not quite correct. You can put a camera inside and you'll see that the lips do buzz. But I understand why they say that. Because if you can cue on just blow air into the instrument and sound comes out and you don't think about what the lips are doing, fantastic. You've made a huge leap. So that's the thing I would say is really, really, really look at what's happening in the mouthpiece. Try to eliminate as much of the tensing. Try to forget that your lips are muscles, basically. If you need muscle, there's plenty available out here, the corners around your embouchure. But try to reserve the as much of the lip tissue inside the mouthpiece as possible to just be a resonator instead of a thing that grabs onto the pitch and helps you out. I still have some seniors and whatever who still sound like because they don't trust me yet that what's inside the mouthpiece can be a resonator. So the earlier you can fix that, the less hassle it'll be for wherever you go to college, or the better results you'll get this year and next if you can keep your embouchure that efficient. So that's the main thing. That unlocks a lot of stuff. There was some great things that you're doing with time as well in here, and dynamic. That's gonna unlock a lot of that, make it sound more controlled. Some of the dotted eighth sixteenths could have been dotted eighth 16th ear instead of that's a very common thing when we're mixing triplets and dotted eighth sixteenths. That's a classic judge thing. When you're judging and you see like the fourth line there with triplets leading into dotted eighth sixteenths, you immediately cue on that and watch it like a hawk, because most people are gonna round off those corners just a little bit. So easy to right. It's the easiest thing in the world to do it like that. But move that 16th a little later, let it snap a little more. And then it's just triplets from then on out. So really, really, really observe those dotted eighth sixteenths. There are some school traditions where people play all dotted eighth sixteenths no matter what. I don't like that. Put as much length as you can on both parts on something like this. as opposed to, right? Longer notes sound louder. So try to make the 16ths as long as you can while still it's only a 16th note, if that makes sense. So we don't want... We run into that a lot when we're working on Ride of the Valkyrie. Right, the downbeat has the accent. The 16th note often gets lost, so what we usually hear is... But it should be... Right, and so we make that first note as long as we can, and the 16th to allow the most tone to come out. Same thing here. Right, it's a fast note, but it's still a long tone. It's just a really, really, really short long tone. Let's see, what else? The retards in this one are really difficult. Really, really difficult with this one. Make sure they're both on the screen. Because we're running out of air. That is a constant thing that bass trombone players have to deal with, is running out of air. So we have to really program it in. And it's really your choice how much or how little you want to do. What you want to do is make it noticeable. We don't want to just motor through and not observe the retard. I think it can be really musical and really tasteful to do just a little bit here. So like the first retard that ends on the fourth line from the end. Let's see. No, hello, I should play the right notes. Right, I think that's maybe the minimum. You could get pretty ridiculous with that one, but that would affect what you do with the last one. What you don't want to do is make any sudden changes. We don't want... As much fun as that is, it was just a little too abrupt. We want to make sure that it's all nice and stretchy. The last one too, you have even less time to do it. That's probably the minimum. Or if you want to get more near the end. As you get slower, the notes can broaden out some as well. If we just make the time slower and the notes stay the same length, what we get is... which has its own effect, but it's kind of a silly one. As we retard, obviously broaden out the notes to fill the entire note slot that is allowed. A really great way of figuring out what sounds good to you with retards, and I'm just talking to everybody, not just Bryson, is to sing it. We are usually much more musically fluent with singing a line, whether or not we get the pitches right. We're a little bit more connected. We don't have to think about how to operate the instrument. We can just make the notes come out. If we just sing it, doesn't even have to be in the correct octave. I mean, some of this you might be able to do if you have a cold or whatever. But yeah, try to sing the line to yourself. You may even record it on your Magic Pocket Rectangle, listen back to it, and then try to play it like that. These are fantastic practice tools because you can record as much or as little as you want. You can do a 2-second snippet and say, okay, how does this sound? Or 10, 15 seconds as this may be, and really just workshop that one thing. Or you could record an entire run and go, okay, what's the judge going to hear? And you write down everything that you would hear and then try to work on those things and then do another run and do that same thing. So from one bar or one note all the way to the entire piece or all three pieces, as the case may be, it's a really good idea to record yourself. But adding to that, if there's a tricky line like that, sing it. And then, once you have the idea of what you want to do musically, then the technique figures itself out, right? If you need to breathe more in advance to be able to make that phrase, great, do it. Or sneaking in breaths, leaving the middle of the embouchure touching the mouthpiece and only breathing through the corners, leaving the middle set. You can get a pretty quick, efficient breath. Right, I put one in there. I'm thinking too much about breathing. I put a couple of breaths in the lower stuff there. I don't know if the camera's high def enough to see it, but hopefully you couldn't really hear them. So you don't have to necessarily slow down to get the breath to happen. Just the corners disengage just a little bit, and we breathe right through there. You can keep the middle of the top and bottom lip still set, so you don't have to reset your embouchure to get the breaths in. Breathe early and often on bass trombone. That's a general tip. Air is free for now, so take advantage of it. There's probably an inflation joke in there, but we're all tired of that one. So that's the broad strokes. Any comments, any questions, any observations?
I don't know if he's cool with analogies, but I really like to speak in analogies. Whenever Dr. Shanks said you should practice this at piano, if you want to think about it, I like to think about there being like a line right through the middle, and that's kind of like where your tone center needs to be. And I'll find myself sometimes that tone center will look kind of like one of those heartbeat monitors where it's going on either side of the line, and whenever I slow it down and I make it quieter, those lines ultimately kind of like come down into a little square. It's like if you were watching yourself on tonal energy or something. There's that little thing you can do with it. But imagine yourself being centered and less on the high upper part, because that's kind of where your lips will tend to go. Try and just lower it into that nice, warm, like James Markey sound, you know? It's like riding right on the bottom of that line, and it's not going under or over that line. It's just right there, and it makes a square. So whenever you play quietly, see if you can just have your air going, just that hot air, you know, just warm and beautiful. But I like what you're doing. I think that if you just slow it down, play quietly, you're going to find a lot more things that you're going to realize. It's going to all become like, whoa, it's apparent. Here we go. But yeah, good job.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, both players did really, really well. And I think both will be very successful. There's a lot of really, really good stuff in both recordings today. We do have some time before I have to go to the tenor meeting. Do we have any questions? Do we have any playing concerns? Does anybody want to play something for us real quick? I can ramble about trombone. I have no problem doing that. You all know. And if you don't, you will. I can opine about a number of topics.
I have a question. On these runs,
Uh-huh.
like what kind of style would be best?
Okay. On number 6 here?
Yeah.
Okay. So for the runs, whatever it is, make it consistent. I mean, it says espressivo, right? So espressivo is expressive. And what are you expressing? It's a strong coffee drink. No. It's you are expressing what you're thinking. So it doesn't really give you any articulation advice. So it could be relatively, you know, a soft articulation. Could be a right, or it could be a more machine gun-like approach. Right. But whatever it is, I would keep that same approach all the way through at least each individual run, right? I wouldn't go. Right, I wouldn't change it up like that, if that makes sense. I think it's much more about connect the center of one pitch to the center of the next pitch. Than it is what the very beginning of that pitch sounds like. If I heard either one of those last two, it would be acceptable as long as it was all done consistently like that. It doesn't say to slur it, so I wouldn't. Right, I wouldn't do that. It also doesn't say to play it secco. Right, that's a little bit too much, but somewhere there in the middle. I did my master's at Indiana with a guy named Pete Ellefson, and one of the things that he talked about all the time was the sphere of acceptability. And so, and he's mainly, it was a performance program. We're pretty much all trying to get orchestra jobs and playing jobs and all that stuff. And so he said, one of the biggest fallacies is we all listen to these recordings of Alessi and Markey and we go, oh, well, I don't want to sound just like Joe. I want to sound like me. And that's great. You'll go ahead and try to sound like Joe. You're never going to sound like him. You might get real close to sounding like Jim Markey or somebody, but you're working with different stuff, right? You might have the exact horn and the exact mouthpiece, but you have different meat and you have different teeth and you have different air and different experiences and you're a different human. And so you're never going to sound exactly like your heroes. So how does that fit into the sphere? Well, you want to make sure that what you're doing is somewhere, not dead center, but close to dead center, right? Like if you're playing with maybe the articulation is over here, or the articulation is over here, or right, if this is your gold standard, maybe it's here, but anywhere in this middle sphere is acceptable. There's a wide variety of articulations that are acceptable and good and all this stuff. What you don't want is to be somewhere out in left field, right? You don't want to have the super weird, like I've had people, actually I have a former student who's playing in Amarillo Symphony with me later today because all my current students were out on tour, or not all of them, but definitely at least like the top half of the studio was out on tour or getting married, so I had to reach into the alumni. But when he was self-taught, he had never had a lesson before he got to school, and so all of his articulations were huh, so he'd play this. So that's outside of the sphere of acceptability. That's off in left field doing something weird. So as long as you don't do that, you're probably fine. So that's articulation style on these runs. What you do want, because it's so much easier to think of positives than negatives, you do want all the pitches to be represented nice and stable. You can vary the amount of decay of the notes, but the note envelopes should probably be touching to avoid the that sort of style. You should probably have if you were to record it on Audacity or some sort of digital audio thing and look at the waveform going by, you'd want to see those notes touching as opposed to there being dead space in the middle. But mostly be consistent. Pick something you like and then play it consistently. Did I address the question?
One last one. I know there's a bunch of practice methods, and I know a couple of them, but like, what's your go-to practice method?
Practice method. In school or right now? Right now, wedge it in whenever I can. When I had actual time, like in school, it is a really, really good idea to identify what works best for you. Everybody's a little bit different. We're all working on the same things, right? We're all working on sound, time, intonation, and style, and content knowledge is kind of a given. So the better your fundamentals are, the better everything is. So if you can only do one practice session in a day, don't jam on these etudes. You know what they sound like by now. Do a fundamental practice session. Get Paul Pollard's warm up or Brian Hecht's warm up or somebody's warm up, or any of the great resources out there, the Elon Morgenstern Trombone Exercise Library Project, even Michael Davis 20-minute warm up, Brad Edwards Tuning Drone Melodies, something like this, something to practice fundamentals, the fundamentals of sound and time and intonation, or the 3 T's, tone, time, and tune. That's the most bang for your buck. Now, when you're actually practicing the material, what most of us do is we start at the top left and we go until we make a mistake, and then we fix that mistake, and then we start at the top left and we go until we make another mistake, and then we fix that mistake. So we're really good at the beginning of the piece, but we may not have seen the end of the piece ever. So one of the best practice techniques I ever got was from a guy named Demondre Thurman. If you don't know who that is, he's a euphonium player, but I promise he's still worth listening to. One of the smartest humans I've ever met and best musicians in the world, in my opinion. And so what he does for solos is he allows himself one run a day, and that's the last thing he does in the day. So the last thing you do, and it's worth trying for these, the last thing you do in the day is you record a run, like it's your audition, like it's your performance. You know, just one run. You know, it's all the pressure, mom's spaghetti, knees are weak, whatever. And so you record that one run. You don't stop for mistakes. You just do it, and then that informs your practice for the next day. The next day, you do your warm up, you do your fundamentals, you get that all squared away, and then you listen to that recording from the previous day, and you go, man, in measure 46, I really screwed that up. So now you know I need to practice measure 46. I need to practice the 2 notes that I rubbed in measure 46. I need to practice the notes on either side of those. I need to put that in context. Why don't I practice measures 45 through 47? Why don't I, do this whole 8-bar phrase? Something like this, so that you fix the error, you put it in context. And there's probably, if your ears are good enough, there's probably any number of little spots like that to go over. In this way, you avoid repetitively practicing the first 3 bars that you already really know. And so then you do that informs your practice. At the end of the day, you do your For All the Marbles run and record it, and that informs your practice for the next day. I've used that for concerto type practice. I've used that for audition practice, and it really does work. It takes some discipline, so I'm bad at it, but it does work. So that's maybe the most transformative thing I could give you is that technique.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else?
I put in the chat some of those warm ups that he was talking about. They're on his website. He's got a little bit more. He's got some of his own things. They've helped me out a lot.
Yeah, it's probably about time for me to write down some more stuff, but why mess with what's working? So there was a question: how do you approach the 3rd etude? That's number 16, right? Yeah. That's the one. So this one, it says leggero. Leggero, really quickly, just means light. And light and bass trombone don't really go together all that much, but we can pretend. So here, I think it's important for this one to not let the articulation be too harsh. Let the lightness come from a little more decay of the notes. You know, it's we don't want. Right. We don't want those notes to be touching like that. Hello, tenor. But anyway, you get the idea. So just style-wise, it's a lot bouncier. Notice they're not separate. It's not. They're still touching. It's just rather than the notes being bricks, they may be more teardrop shaped. Right. So that's the style taken care of. Also, knowing the keys that these pieces are in. This one's in a relatively innocuous F minor, but yeah, knowing the keys that these are in, F, A flat, and C are going to be really important notes. Whenever you see accidentals, you know it's not in that key anymore. What is an E natural doing in F minor for that, just for an example? Or we have on the end of the second line, we have like a borrowing of some of the major scale, which we could call the melodic minor scale, considering that's what that is. But yeah, the harmony in this one isn't really that difficult. There's a couple of borrowed notes from the major scale in here that tonicize the 5, but other than that, this isn't harmonically that much to speak of. One other thing, there's some high Fs in the third etude, and there's some G flats and things like that in the other ones. And I think it's the shift to really needing to go E to play a high note is a lot sooner on bass trombone for most people than it is on tenor. I think when we're playing really low notes, the tongue is sitting flat on the bottom of the mouth. And when we're playing a middle range, the tongue is up a little higher, but the tongue is way up here to play these higher notes. Like if you're saying E, or even E, or some other syllable that's a variation on E. You can experiment with vowels from different languages if you want. But in general, the higher you play, the more the tongue is arched up in the mouth. I can talk about that for another at least 2 hours. But doing that on, say, the third line, especially if you do each one of those intervals and really check in with what your tongue is doing. Try to keep your tone consistent, and usually the way to do that is to arch the tongue up more. The more E, the higher you go. Yeah. So that's broad strokes. Do we have any more really brief requests? Because I have the tenor ones starting very soonish here. Yeah. Corey put a video of probably, if I had to guess, Doug Yo in an MRI machine playing lip slurs.
Sarah Willis.
Oh, Sarah Willis. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, she plays horn, but that's okay. In the Berlin Philharmonic, I think, fourth horn. She's fantastic. But yeah, there's also a video of Doug Yo playing lip slurs in an MRI machine. And what's interesting is that he always taught that his tongue was at the bottom of his mouth all the time. It was always ah for every note. And then he goes in an MRI machine and watches his tongue raise up like this to play the highest notes. So I think that was probably an illuminating experience for him. It's neat that we can actually see this stuff. So anyway, that's broad stuff about the third one. Actually, the sheets that they give you, the errata and the performance guide, it's a really nicely written thing. This etude must always be nimble and light regardless of range and dynamic. Long tone feeling with the air support. Let the sound and technique ride on top of the cushion of air. They have bounce to them, and that bounce, I think, again, comes from the teardrop shape of the note rather than it being this isn't a Bruckner etude. So I think that's a good starting point for that. If you guys have more questions, if you want to send videos and have me eventually listen to them, I've got very little to do comparatively over the break. My great gig season is ending today. So other than a Christmas Eve service. So I'm going to have a lot less to do. And so if I could listen to some trombone videos, that's great. If you want to send them to me, fantastic. The email address you can probably find because you can use Google, but just jshanks@wtamu.edu is my email. You can get a hold of me there, or I'm pretty visible online. You can, the studio Instagram, you can get to me through there, or I've got one as well that I put some playing on, but it's mostly pictures of my kid. If you're into that kind of thing. But yeah, I love to answer questions. I'm not going to give you a big WT sales pitch Just like with everything that we do, of course, I really enjoy all the interest we have in the studio, and I'd love for everybody to be part of the studio, including every one of you, those of you who aren't already out there. But I feel like it kind of speaks for itself, and I'm not going to give you any sort of pressure. If you're going to school somewhere else, that's great. I still like to talk trombone or whatever else. So don't worry about that too much. Okay, any other questions, concerns? Awesome. Thank you very much for attending, and congrats again to the people that played. It sounded great. And we will see you the next time.
Yeah, show up to the tenor one,
Yep.
too.
Absolutely. I'm going to start that right
Okay.
Thank you guys for coming.